Welcome. I am Nazia Hussain. I'm a brown-skinned female with black hair. I am sitting in a room with a window to my right. Welcome to Deep Hanging Out Digitally, Social Media Strategies for the Contemporary Job Market. Webinar outline is here. The presenters we have today are Ingrid Ramón Parra, the founder of powerofAnthro.com. We also have Adam Gamwell, co-founder of Missing Link Studios and host of This Anthro Life podcast. Next slide, please. This is a webinar series, Acquiring New Skills for Your Job Search, a 3-part webinar series. Next slide, please. As you can see, go back one, please. Thank you. As you can see, this is part 3, the final of this career webinar series, Deep Hanging Out Digitally. On this slide, you can see that there were 2 other webinars that were presented this month on September 10th and September 17th. These are now available online at the AAA website. Next slide, please. I will review some webinar logistics. We are using a number of features to make this webinar accessible to everyone. We are providing closed captioning. The icon is at the bottom of your screen. Presenters will be providing visual descriptions of themselves, as I just did, and the slides they will be going over. A reminder to the presenters to please announce themselves before they speak. Please turn off your video and microphone unless you are speaking. Open and use the chat function, also at the bottom of your screen. Please write the word question if you have a question. I also encourage everyone on the webinar to go ahead and answer any questions that gets posed and/or offer resources. By Tuesday of next week, you can visit the AAA website for the following: 1, career webinar recordings, 2, PowerPoint slide decks, 3, resources, and 4, answers to the chat question and answers. Should you have any questions or concerns during the webinar, please notify Nell, our accessibilities coordinator, through the chat room. A shout out also to my co-coordinator, Elizabeth Brioty, who helped organize and help coordinate this webinar. Thanks also goes to members of the AAA staff who are supporting these career webinars: Scott Hall, Nell, Gabby Dunkley, Daniel Ginsberg, Sean Eiffel, Jeff Martin, and Ed Libo. Next slide, please. This is my visual description. I am Nazia Hussain. My pronouns are she and her. I am a brown-skinned female with black hair. I am sitting in a room with a window to my right. Next slide, please. So here we are with Deep Hanging Out Digitally, Social Media Strategies for the Contemporary Job Market. Our presenters will guide us on how and why digital and social media engagement is vital to the modern day job seeker, and how you can utilize anthropological tools to make your next career move. Next slide, please. This slide shows the webinar outline that you may have seen displayed on your screens if you joined the webinar before we started. Our presenters will be speaking for a total of about 25 minutes or less. During the presentation, please open and use the chat to ask your questions. After the presentation, we will do our best to answer as many of the chat questions as possible. For those questions that remain unanswered, we will respond to them and post the questions on the AAA website under the September 24th webinar. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. I now turn the webinar over to Ingrid Ramón Parra and Adam Gamwell. Next slide, please.
Welcome everyone. I'm Ingrid, Ramón, Parra, and this is my visual description. I am a Latina with short dark hair, and today I'm at my home office and there is a yellow wall behind me. Next slide, please.
And hey everyone, my name is Dr. Adam Gamwell. I am a white male with a shaved head in my mid-30s, and I'm sitting also in my home office with bookshelves behind me. Next slide, please.
This is Ingrid speaking again and introducing our webinar here. So I apologize for any background noises. There's an ambulance sounding behind me. So today we really want to share with you, Adam and I, an approach that was really successful for us as people recently on the job market. And really it's an approach, a very anthropological approach to being successful on the job market. And there's a couple of reasons why we believe this works. And the first really is recognizing that the academic job market and the non-academic job market have different approaches. For those of us really invested in academia, the job market feels very familiar and it can feel very linear. The non-academic job market is opposite of that. It's very highly variable. It encompasses a lot of different fields. And because of that, it can feel overwhelming. And for some of us, it can feel unfamiliar. We believe that candidates should update their strategies to reflect the contemporary job market. Strategies that worked 5 or 10 years ago may not be as successful today. And part of that is because engaging with digital platforms is really required for success. At minimum, you look for positions online and apply through a digital platform. But really what Adam and I want to suggest is that you should do more than that and engage digitally in a more meaningful and strategic way. We believe that thinking of social media as a landscape that's very dynamic and full of cultural spaces really facilitates an anthropological approach. And we believe that in of itself is a really effective job market strategy. Next slide, please. And in doing so, we've highlighted distinct benefits of this approach. The first one is that you learn to articulate your value through an increased awareness of how to make your expertise understood across different fields. Oftentimes, those of us who have a lot of academic experience, we don't know how to translate this experience to other people and how to translate our value. And inversely, other people may not understand our experience. So really it is on us to be able to explain how we add value to different organizations or institutions. We believe that you also become informed about what positions are better suited for your skill set and what positions you're excited about and can see yourself doing or wanting. And in doing so, we believe you'll get greater empowerment and confidence about your professional identity, about your professional possibilities, and feel more empowered and have more agency around your professional future. Next slide, please.
All right, hey, and this is Adam jumping in here. So this slide is titled Getting Started with Social Media. And so kind of what Ingrid was pointing out is that, you know, if you're looking for a job that is not on the academic track, right, things can feel quite nonlinear. And one of the ways and strategies that we've found that has been helpful for us in terms of putting ourselves out there and building a sense of who we are professionally and letting people see the work that we're doing has been through social media. And when you think of social media, obviously we may think of platforms like Facebook or Twitter, and that is what we're talking about. But one of the things about these platforms is that oftentimes we may think about, I use Facebook to post photos of my family or my kids or hanging out with my friends. I don't think about it in a professional sense. And you may look at Twitter and think about these short little tweets that are 240 characters. And really how useful can that be in terms of finding work? But what we want to point out is that there actually is a huge amount of value in using social media as part of your strategy. And one way that we want to encourage you to think about social media is, rather than thinking about them as strictly platforms, you might think about them as content that you and others are creating. And so there is Facebook, there is Twitter, there is LinkedIn, there is Instagram. But when you think about these from a content perspective, it's a question of what are the kinds of things, ideas, words, what are the kinds of ideas and words that people want to put out? What ideas they want to share? And from this perspective, then you can think less about what platform should I be on? Do I need to be on all of them? Because that obviously can feel quite overwhelming, since there are a lot of social media platforms, right? TikTok is probably the newer one that people are thinking about, right? But the idea with this in terms of content is you can think about seeking quality content that's really going to help you understand and engage with pertinent topics and thought leaders in the job fields that you want to enter. And so we'll talk about some strategies in case that sounds confusing, in terms of if you're not sure what field you want to enter or who you should be listening to or reading about, but thinking about just what kind of content draws you in. So again, getting started with social media at this high level is about seeking quality content that helps you understand what kind of work is out there. What is the work that people are doing? And as I mentioned a little bit before, you can engage strategically with social media. The idea is you do not have to engage with every single platform. You don't have to be posting on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram, because that is overwhelming. We would agree with you there. So the idea is to kind of build a sense of strategy about what it is that's going to get you around the kind of content that's going to help you understand the fields you want to get into. Next slide, please. So in this slide is titled Creating a Job Strategy. And so what we can do here is start identifying the kinds of work that you would like to do. For example, if you love doing research, which many of us as anthropologists enjoy, that's what our training is in for the most part. Do you want to work in design? Are you interested in the visual fields, such as graphic design or maybe even video production? Are you drawn to YouTube videos or Netflix content, for example? Are you interested in management or administration is another thing to think about. A lot of anthropologists will go into higher ed administration, for example, or these kind of skills can be translated elsewhere too. So the plan is to just begin identifying the kinds of work that you're interested in. You don't have to nail it down to one thing, but thinking about these broad categories, again, like research, design, or management. When you think about these fields, you can also then learn about the types of positions that exist and then use that to look for open positions. A quick spoiler alert, we'll say that LinkedIn is a great platform and a space of content for finding professional work and professionals trying to share ideas about their different fields. And so we will say that you can think about, if you want to see open positions, LinkedIn is a great place to go, but it is not the only place to look. You also want to understand that fields have their own sets of meanings and cultural values. One example here is that empathy has a value in the design fields. And so you're going to see the word empathy being used a lot. You may think of empathy in terms of, caring for somebody else, or feeling what it feels like to be somebody else, or, feeling with somebody else's experience, for example. But in design, they talk about it this way, but it's really used as a method of getting, quote unquote, inside the head of someone that you're designing for. And so it may not be the exact same idea or the same definition of the term, but the idea here is that fields themselves will have their own sets of meanings and cultural values. And so by looking at how people are talking about their fields and their work on social media, will give you a sense of what these sort of sets of meanings and cultural values are. And then a fourth bullet point about this creating a job strategy is letting other professionals know about you professionally. And this is why social media is so valuable for you as creating content. You can share a professional opinion on LinkedIn. You can write a blog post on Medium. You could even get in a Twitter conversation. The idea is, as Ingrid pointed out before too, that this is about engaging. And so you want to then put your voice out there. And that can be as simple as starting to like different tweets or favorite them, like people's posts, as well as then once you feel you have your sea legs a little bit more, you can then start commenting, or adding into the conversation too. Next slide, please. And so as we said, this slide is titled Accessing Platforms Based on Content. And so again, we said one way to think about this is there are platforms such as, we have these listed on the slide here, LinkedIn, Twitter, Medium, which is essentially a self-publishing blog platform, Facebook, Slack groups, which is a chat program that many of you probably know. But the interesting thing about Slack is that companies might use it internally, but then a lot of professional or professional interest groups also use Slack. And so there's people that are interested in a design field, for example. There's one called Ethnography Hangout that we can share later too. That's for ethnographers looking for work and trying to talk about latest ideas in the field. There are Google groups, which are kind of like old school forums, but used today. So they're sort of current school too, I suppose. That are also great ways of seeing threaded conversations. There's Reddit, which is a long-standing internet giant of just basically user-generated content of people sharing stories, links, ideas, asking questions of each other, of community members on every topic imaginable. So there is a Reddit subthread for anthropology, for cultural anthropology, for design anthropology, for archaeology, for bioanthropology, you name it, it's there. There's of course podcasting, small plug for This Anthro Life and other anthro-focused podcasts that are dedicated to helping people think about careers. And that's one of the things that we value, as well as Instagram, right? Which is obviously an image-based platform, but a lot of companies are using Instagram to share media and to get the word out about their work. And so this is another way just to think about how our company is using it. So the idea is that each social media platform will feature unique content. And so thinking about what kind of content is going to be most useful for your career goals. So for example, if you are thinking about design or something in the visual field, then Instagram is an important content space because it's seeing how people display and share information visually, right? If you are thinking about any kind of other platform, audio work, for example, or audio visual media, podcasting can be helpful. Reddit is useful for everything, which is actually quite nice. And so now we will go to the next slide and I'll turn it back over to Ingrid.
Thank you. This is Ingrid speaking. So this slide is called Start Hanging Out. Deep hanging out, we're going to do it digitally. The goal here is to learn about the types of positions you might be interested in. So as Adam said, LinkedIn is really excellent for finding open positions. And when you look through these, really pay attention to the job title, the types of skills in the description, and the type of experience that is wanted. And when you do that, you kind of get a couple things. And one is you start seeing how certain people differentiate between very similar titles, or how even one title is conceived of differently in different spaces. So you start getting, sharpening your eye to the nuance of skills and experience, and start thinking about where you fit in within all of that nuance. Once you do that, we suggest you find other people that have roles that are similar to your skill set. And again, LinkedIn is really great for this because it gives you a snapshot not only of someone's education, which helps you find people who maybe have done masters or PhDs in your field or tangentially related fields, but it also gives you a little bit of a work history and a snapshot of how this person moved in and out through their experience and where their path is. And it gives you an idea of how you can potentially also carve your own path or what your own professional path may be. So LinkedIn is really great for that. Professional websites, there are a lot of people who have strong professional preferences, presences, a strong professional presence in personal websites or portfolios, and they share resumes, their materials, points of views, and this is a really great way to get an in-depth look on how to approach professional identity. And we suggest you start following content creators that align with your professional interests and your preferred fields. Again, LinkedIn is becoming increasingly more social, and we suggest you like and share and kind of read through the different postings that are available there. Twitter is also really great. What's great about Twitter is that there's a lot of exchange back and forth. It's very dynamic. So not only do you get a point of view of the poster, but you also get just the conversational dynamics that happen through this content, which gives you an opportunity to engage, or what I like to do, lurk. Just read and learn and see what people are talking about and thinking through, and what are points of consensus and points of tension, and start learning about the nuances of the fields. And Medium is also a great one for more in-depth kind of 5-minute articles about practice. I really suggest you look at Medium as well for that, but also because a lot of people post job interview strategies for very kind of hard to get positions. So you also get some of that backstage look on how people approach hiring and finding people for their teams. And that's been tremendously helpful for me personally. Next slide, please. So once you've done that and you found people that you're interested in following, we also suggest you find thought leaders and field experts. And your goal here is to identify professionals that are leaders and are actively creating content digitally, but also in book form, which I know is one of our favorite forms as academics. But what you want to do here is find social profiles of people that have spoken at large professional conferences in fields that interest you. And really great place to start is the EPIC conference. So go on the EPIC website, look at current and past speakers, see where they're going, find their LinkedIn profiles, connect to them, hopefully they accept you, but really start doing that kind of digital curating and following. The Qualitative Researcher Consultants Association, the QRCA, is also really great for finding people that are doing qualitative research outside of academia. And you can also find conferences that are very just broad field-based. Let's say you discovered the field of design research and you're really excited about it. You can easily Google design research conferences and so many will come up. And you can start finding people that way. And what's interesting about the moment that we're living in now is that a lot of these conferences are actually online now, which means you can really start attending a lot of these conferences and get a sense of the topics and the people that are there, usually for an affordable or minimal fee. So we are living in an age where we can experience these types of conferences in our couch or on our desk. So once you've kind of looked through the kind of conferences circuit, you also want to find industry authors, people who are seen as having an authority on particular fields or topics. A few of my favorites are Sam Ladner. She writes a lot on practical ethnography in business, how to do and sell ethnography outside as part of research for different companies and organizations. I like Sid Harrell as well. She writes on being a practicing civic technologist, so she works in the civic sector and at the intersection of technology. There's many more, so many more, but those are just an example. So start looking for those books as well. And of course, find business and practicing anthropologists through LinkedIn, but here's a great opportunity to actually harness your in-person network as well. Ask around your department or ask colleagues. We always know of at least one person who is succeeding out in industry. So start finding those people and start making those connections. Next slide, please. And really an important thing about being successful, as we anthropologists know, is you have to be able to speak the right language and say the right words, which is the title of this slide here. And what you want to do here is you want to learn about field-specific terms, issues, sets of meanings, and cultural values in your field of interest. As Adam said earlier, empathy, for example, is something that is a big value in the world of design and design research. And recently we see a new value of delight coming. So there are new and old values going in and out of vogue in fields. So it's important to know which ones are the ones people are engaging with now. So one, you speak the way they speak, And two, you don't sound outdated in your experience. You don't want to bring up something that people said, okay, we don't really, the last time anyone has said that was 10 years ago. You really want to feel like you have your hand on the pulse of the different fields that you're interested in. And so you have to identify the topics that people are talking about and writing about in your preferred domain of work. If you see certain topics being engaged with a lot, then it'll signal to you that that's probably something important for you to know. And importantly for the platforms is you should also explore how to maximize the search functions of each platform, since each platform is different and there are some similarities across functions, but really start exploring how to find information. So for example, how hashtags work, any mentions, the use of filters, suggested connections, really explore the platform and see what the possibilities are for you to find content and to find people. So that the goal really is for you to be able to understand and communicate in a way that other people understand as well. Next slide, please.
All right, so this is Adam back again. The title of this slide is Collecting Data. And so building on what Ingrid is sharing there about learning the language, one of the ways of doing that is by what we might call collecting data. The goal here is to understand how people and organizations are presenting themselves professionally across various different fields. What you can do here is collecting samples of publicly available resumes and portfolios. And if I can, I'll make a plug for the previous webinar with AAA that Ingrid and I helped out on that was actually on resumes and portfolios and CVs. And so if you want on the AAA website where we have these webinars, you can actually see examples of our former resumes and portfolios. So there's one way to find them. But other people have these listed too. You may find them on their websites that could be linked from their Twitter profiles, or from LinkedIn is obviously a good place to see job experience from people. But the idea is when people put out resumes to share, it's not because they're the greatest resumes or the most important CVs or portfolios, but they're things that people are willing to share in a professional sense. And that's an important piece of data in and of itself. They feel this is worthy of sharing. And so therefore it's worth checking it out. Another thing you can do is understanding organizational branding. And what I mean by this is not the logo of the company, although again, if you're working in visual design, you probably want to know that. Also depends if you like a logo, I suppose. But branding in this sense is how an organization presents itself. And so you might think about press releases when they're talking about a new research project they have going on, or a new design, or a new award they just won. How are they talking about this? Are they putting their press releases out on their website, on their Medium blog, on their Twitter, maybe on their Facebook, right? What social media accounts are companies using? This is something important too. If you have been on social media at any point in the past 15 years, you have probably seen that companies used to have a lot of Facebook pages that they would really focus on. Nowadays, that's not so much. And this is speaking to Ingrid's point that what companies use change over time, and it's important to be aware of this. Facebook still matters a great deal. It still has a few billion people that use it. But you see companies a lot more focusing on Medium blogs now, and on Twitter, and certainly on LinkedIn and Instagram. And so just being aware of where and what social media accounts companies are using. So again, flipping it, as Ingrid was saying before, if you have a sense of thought leaders, whether you find them from looking on social media, reading about them on blogs, checking out books, watching TED Talks, you can have a sense of where, what platforms that these thought leaders are putting themselves out on. And when you're putting these things together, you yourself want to say, how do I promote my own thinking and how do I look professional too? You can recreate the sets of these kinds of materials that reflect the aesthetics of the fields that you're pursuing. This is also something that that Ingrid and I shared on our previous webinar about how portfolios and CVs and resumes look differently depending on who it is and what field you're trying to get into. And that's super important to realize. So by seeing how people present themselves online when they have publicly available information like portfolios or CVs, you can have that, you can borrow the aesthetics, and that then helps you establish yourself as understanding What are some of the sets of meanings that people have in that area? Next slide, please. Another way to do this is about identifying projects that inspire you. This is a tactic that I have used for years. And the goal here is, it's quite simple. It's just taking notes of projects that inspire you. And this could be a neat design project that was done in a community that was helping elderly residents vote, or it could be helping disenfranchised communities have access to food. It could be just a really interesting new toy that you thought a company developed and they had a really interesting way of doing it. It's just finding projects that you feel drawn to. And this is, to me, one of the best ways of a bit about following your nose, following your passion. Because as anthropologists, we all have a huge and varied set of interests, and it can often feel a bit overwhelming to figure out what it is that we should do with all those interests, right? So this is really just about finding projects that you dig, that are interesting to you, and getting involved if you can in terms of just seeing how they're being written about or how they have, been written about or shared about on social media, whether they're parts of companies or individual entrepreneurs or whatever it is. And this is, we can attach this idea of finding projects that inspire you in relationship to the categories that we've talked about above, touches getting a sense of who are the local experts or thought leaders that are working in these fields, that are doing these kinds of projects. What language are they using? Again, are they using empathy or delight? Are they talking about research, qualitative, quantitative? Are they saying theoretical ideas? Are they feeling very grounded? Do they seem more like an NGO or more of a for-profit business? Whatever it is, right? How are they talking about their work? What kind of data are they using? Do they put out reports or white papers or academic journals or magazines or podcasts? How are they publishing about their work is this idea. And of course, the artifacts that goes along with this too. What are the things that they're making? Next slide, please. And one of the other main last pieces that we'll share with you right now is about becoming visible. And the goal with this is just to create a professional online identity. And so this is what we're talking about when we think about social media platforms as content that you create versus the platform itself. This is about you putting ideas out into the world. This begins with simple engagement, like liking a tweet or doing a hand clap for someone's article on LinkedIn that you think is inspiring or interesting. As well as then moving into actually creating your own content. And this can be as simple as putting out a tweet, jumping into a conversation on Twitter, answering a question that a community member has on Reddit. Because I guarantee you, if you look on Reddit, as I said before, Reddit has so many sub-communities, you will know an answer to some question that somebody else does not. And you can be a really, really helpful community member in that space. And Reddit is actually one of the lowest barriers to entry in terms of getting engaged on social media area, because again, it's a lot of question and answer based in the very community. So this helps you become visible and helps people then come to recognize you as someone that is willing to help the community, to engage, to answer questions. And then also becoming visible is about being where employers are, right? As obviously we're talking about social media as a job search and job finding strategy. And so thinking about where creating the kind of content and putting content out is going to be most useful. So obviously, as I've said, we would find LinkedIn is one of the best places for content consumption and creation because a lot of employers are on there. But the reason I keep talking about Reddit is because I know of employers that go on Reddit to ask questions of people, or they'll be on there to find answers to something else, and they will then see who is active in the community. So the point is, don't only think about LinkedIn. LinkedIn matters, but there are many ways in order to sort of be a visible community member and someone that is a viable, job candidate. And the other thing about this, about becoming visible, is about sharing a professional point of view, right? This can be something as writing a blog post on Medium, as we said. You can retweet something, and again, sharing on LinkedIn. But the idea is to, again, start getting comfortable putting content out there. You do not have to start out with an academic article or a book. And if you did, good for you, but I have never done that, and most of us probably will never do that, right? So it's starting about engaging. And the nice thing about social media is you can start small. And it can be as simple as liking a tweet, right? The idea is to just get yourself to start engaging and helping yourself become visible by becoming a member of community, right? It's the same way that you want to make sure that you're there for your family members. You might give them a call to check in on them or see how your friends are doing, shoot them a text saying, hey, I'm thinking about you. It's the same kind of idea. You're just putting it out into a bit more of a professional community. And next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Ingrid and Adam. Those are very thoughtful and poignant, summary points to take home for all of us jumping into a new career or even just job searching right now. So right now we'd like to open up the chat Q&A, and if you have any questions, you may be able to come off mute right now and ask your questions directly to the presenters.
Hi, I'd like to jump in, I guess, at this point. My name is Daniel Ginsberg. I'm the Director of Education and Professional Practice at the AAA. I'm a male-presenting white person with glasses, a black-collared shirt, and asymmetric haircut, and I'm sitting in front of a virtual background that's, if you know the film Spirited Away, it's the train tracks to Zeniba's house. If people do have questions, I would encourage you to put it in the chat, and I've been monitoring the chat through the whole conversation. And I wanted to sort of aggregate that and post some questions to the presenters. I'd encourage people to continue engaging in the chat if you have other questions that come up, or even to answer other people's questions as they come up. There's always a lively conversation in there. But we do have 70 people on the line. And so in the interest of not having everyone jumping in, I'm gonna ask people to stay on mute and with their cameras turned off. So that said, one thing that I noticed really strongly coming through in the chat is that people are identifying a lot of barriers to entry in social media. So I've got a couple of them in my notes, and I want to bring them up one at a time and see if you could comment on it. One of them did get a response already. The question was, how do you make time for social media when there's just so much content coming in? It really feels like drinking from a fire hose. If you open up Twitter, I'm not sure what it looks like if you haven't subscribed to it these days, because I've been on Twitter since 2008. But when I open up Twitter, I could just scroll all day long. How do you either make time for it so that it's something you can approach, but also limit it so that it's useful to you and you don't end up getting completely sucked in?
I can answer some of that, and then we can hear Adam. This is Ingrid speaking. So I think about it as a trade-off. The last time I was on the job market was 2018, and I approached the job market in just a very hectic way, just finding positions that were open and applying. That was basically it. And I realized that I spent so much time just applying and finding positions and never getting any callbacks, that the way that I conceive of it now is I wasted a lot of time doing that, and I could have allocated some of that time to be more strategic, which includes basically what Adam and I outlined in this presentation. So that was kind of my trade-off. I became more strategic, and maybe I applied to less positions, but the positions I did apply for, I had more success and chances of getting a callback or an interview or being offered a position. So it is a trade-off, it is a time investment. And yes, if you're not good at managing your time, or if you get sucked into a Twitter thread, you can kind of spend a lot of time on it, more than you probably like. So there has to be some discipline with the engagement. But I do think that what you can get out of it, which is that feeling of empowerment. I think a lot of us who leave academia are in the process of transitioning. We often feel like frauds when we were like faking it out in this other world. And I think engaging in, with these strategies, you actually stop feeling less like a fraud or a fake, and start recognizing the fact that you have something of value to offer, and you start doing better and engaging with people and interviews and with your materials and so on and so forth. So there is a trade-off, there is a time investment. It can get out of hand if you don't discipline yourself, but in my point of view, I think it's definitely worth it to have a strategy that includes engaging with social media 100%.
Yeah, that's a really great point. This is Adam jumping in here real quick as well. And I appreciate that question. I certainly feel the time crunch. And there is, as we've said, so many kinds of platforms out there, and there's so much. Twitter is perhaps the best example of a fire hose of social media, right? Because the tweets are 240 characters. They're short. They move very quickly. So to be honest, I would say that Twitter is actually one of the more difficult platforms to feel strategic about. For me personally, I will say, just because it feels like it moves so quickly. Two things that I have found to be helpful One is Medium, as I've mentioned now, and I'll keep mentioning Medium. It is a blog platform, so it's different reading content, which could be 1 minute to depending on how much time you want to spend reading an article. But like all social media platforms, what I like about Medium is that you can then put what you're interested in, and then you can follow certain either specific articles themselves or authors or sort of collectives. And then Medium learns over time what it is that you like to read. And so then it begins to suggest things. I get a daily digest, for example, one email of here's things that we think you'll want to read today. I don't read all of them ever, but it usually gives me 1 or 2 pieces of content to read. And then from that, I could spin off and check something out on Twitter, for example. That all said, I also love Twitter. And what I found with help for Twitter is that there's aggregators. I mentioned this in the chat somewhere in there, and that one of them is called writerelevance.com, for example. And what you do here is you say, I'm interested in anthropology, and you can kind of search for whatever you want. And then that aggregates stuff that people have that are talking about anthropology. So then you kind of get, again, a digest. So it's almost like hacking social media a little bit to see how to find topics around things that you're interested in. Something else that I imagine Daniel has done too is that when you follow a certain person, Twitter then suggests other people that are like them. And that's one way to then just take notes of why is Twitter suggesting these other people to follow. Or if you click on a company, I say, I like IDEO or the American Anthropological Association, it'll suggest that you also follow NAPA, for example, right? So taking notes of how it suggests things to you tells you a little bit about what the algorithm thinks you're into. And that's another way to then, get a sense of how to more strategically do it. But yeah, agreed. We feel your pain. It is, it's a lot. So aggregators are helpful. And then obviously like putting your interest into the algorithm, and then it will help kind of refine what it is that's helpful to pay attention to.
This is Daniel again. Thanks for that. I think, thinking about Twitter and the challenges of engaging in Twitter, it feels very democratic in the way that on LinkedIn, people lead with their professional status. You might feel nervous talking to someone who's very much more senior or whatever. But on Twitter, a lot of that is very flattened, for better and worse. You'll have people, just random anyone coming up and questioning your expertise unprompted. But also, in my personal case, I got within sniffing distance of 2 different postdocs entirely through Twitter, which is a story I can share another time if anyone's interested. And I think what that speaks to, this is a point that came up in the chat that Keith Kellerson raised. And I'm naming him by name because he was a presenter on an earlier one of these webinar series. He says, being visible is important. No time to be self-conscious, just do it. And it requires, I think, that kind of putting yourself out there to be able to make the best use of some of these platforms. But that speaks to another concern that I'm hearing from a lot of people in the chat. For example, one person said, can you give me some examples of how not to reach out to people when people have tried reaching out to you and they really failed at it? Which speaks to a fear, right? That if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it wrong. And maybe it'll be worse than if I had never tried at all. I'll give people a bad impression of me. Someone else asked, how do employers evaluate the social media presence of job applicants? And so there's a sense that, people are going to Facebook stalk you when you apply for a job, and they'll turn up all sorts of seedy things from your past that you'd rather you not know about. Which, if you're going to be engaged in these online spaces at all, is I don't know how people use these different platforms, but that feels like a legitimate concern. So I guess there's just a lot of nervousness around doing it right, making a good impression, making sure that you don't embarrass yourself in front of people that you don't even know are listening. So if you would have any advice either for handling those or just for getting over the fear that you might do those things.
I can speak to that because I've been rejected so many times. Yes, rejection, it's gonna happen and it's okay. And I think that's one of the great things about social media is that there's different levels of permanency, different levels of the pain of rejection, and other times you can actually be anonymous as well. So for example, I also really love Reddit like Adam because I created a professional account to follow professional things, and people don't really know who I am, but I'm engaging and asking questions a little more freely than I would, and I get and answer questions that the other people pose as well. So that's one very low stakes, anonymous way of getting very personalized conversation going, or the Reddit subthreads, and I really love that. Now with Twitter, yeah, you might be able to say something that someone may not agree with. And again, the sense that I'm taking, and I think maybe Adam as well, for this presentation is that you're engaging professionally. So don't say something that you would be embarrassed about later. Don't say something you don't feel 100% confident or sure about. Don't be too incredibly controversial, is my point of view. Engage with respect. And if you say something and someone else doesn't like it, it's okay, because in 3 or 4 days, that Twitter will be, that tweet will be who knows where in the, timeline of things. So it's also not, the stakes aren't so heavy with that. I think the stakes are a little bit heavier with LinkedIn because people engage with a greater level of professionality on LinkedIn. But even then, I would say just share something you feel defines you professionally. And that should keep you from sharing things that might make you feel embarrassed or judged. So I think get rid of the fear, because the sense of empowerment that you get from engaging is going to just kind of offset that. Like, don't get anxious, get empowered. And it's okay if people don't like everything you say, it's fine. And it's okay if you reach out to people and they don't message you back. That's happened to me so many times. But eventually something will give, and you'll see that you, like you just said, you got close to postdocs just exclusively through Twitter. And even just yesterday, someone messaged me because I congratulated them on a new position on LinkedIn. And I haven't met this person in real life. And they told me, hey, if you see any careers that you want on Instagram, let me know. So effectively saying, like, I can give you an employee referral type of thing. So those things will get me closer to people and things in positions that I'm interested in. Yes, there's a risk of the negative side effects of rejection or people not liking what you say. But I think, again, the trade-off is worth it for what you can get out of it, which is more genuine professional engagement. So don't be scared, be wise, but do it, is my final word.
Well said, Ingrid. This is Adam jumping in here real quick. I'm also going to note, I'm just looking at the chat while we're talking to, and Keith Kellerson once again said something that's helpful in this space, just to drop in, that I was thinking the same thought. And that is that if you're like, nervousness is normal, right? And it's it feels a bit like anxiety provoking to try to reach out and maybe put some ideas out there in a professional context if you're not sure what that looks like. But I want to echo Keith's idea here too. I was thinking this same thought, that any company or hiring manager or recruiter that is going to be really judgmental, you should ask yourself if that's even the kind of place or culture you want to work in. And so that is actually, if you think about it, that's actually part of your research process. Like if you find that you're nervous about a company because they seem super stiff, or they seem like they don't have a lot of leeway, or they seem almost, unfun as its own way of thinking about it too. Ask yourself if that's a place that you want to work. If you're already nervous about talking with them because of they seem a certain way, think about that, right? And that's not like the only thing you should do, of course, but this is something that I have thought about for years too. Similar to Ingrid, I've been more or less on the job market for 2-ish years. I've been working for myself, kind of self-employed. And I recently picked up more or less a full-time job a few months ago. So I understand what it's like to be on that job market continuously. And also just what it means to hustle for work, for yourself. And a lot of it is really this idea of you will get more comfortable the more you kind of put yourself out there. And one thing, or one like specific strategy that I have done that feels better whenever if I'm not sure how I should communicate or whether it's worthwhile reaching out. Actually, I'll give you 2 things. One is that engage respectfully, like Ingrid said, but also just engage positively. Start with saying, I really loved what the point you made about X, right? Use it as a complimentary space to help that person know that you read their work or read what they're talking about and that you agree and think it's an interesting idea. I wouldn't start off with I disagree with you. I think this is a bad idea. You can do that, but it's kind of easier to start off in a complimentary and again, always being a respectful space. And it helps the other person then think, oh, cool, this person is paying attention and we're kind of in some level of agreement. It creates a positive association, which is a nice thing. The second thing I'll just point out real quick is that if you're reaching out for somebody and asking them for something, it is important to consider, one, asking them a specific question. It's kind of saying, I need help with my job search. It doesn't help anybody, because again, if you think you're time crunched with a social media strategy, that's true because a lot of us are. Imagine then how the other person is going to feel when you're saying, I just need help in general. How are they going to help you in any easy way, right? It makes a lot of work or a lot of burden on them to do something for you. So think very specifically what it is that you want help with or what you're trying to figure out. And so come up with one specific question. I'm working on my resume and I'm not sure if this line is very clear about what I'm looking for my career. My goal is to say this. Here's what I've written. Does this make sense? Something very specific like that then doesn't require a lot of time or effort on the other person's part to then give their wisdom, right? So think about how to ask very specific questions in that case. And then with that too, just realize that sometimes when we're asking for advice or help or reaching out to people, what we're actually doing is asking them to do something that they would get paid for. And that's totally fine. But realizing that sometimes people don't respond because you're actually asking them to do what they do for work. And if you're saying, hey, can you look at this thing for free or help me with this for free? They may not respond. And it's not because they don't care or they don't want to help, but there is just a recognition that like what they do for work is actually what you're asking them to do, but you're not saying, I want to hire you for this. So just consider too, what it is that you're asking people to do when you're trying to reach out and get advice or information. And now I do want to caveat this by saying, I know this is separate than like jumping in a conversation on Reddit, right? But this is going to be part of it. As you get to know people and put your ideas out there, you may ask for advice. And we all should do that. We should be looking out for mentors and people that we can look up to and talk with, get information from. But just being aware of asking specific questions that they can answer, without doing a huge amount of work on their part. And then obviously that work can increase as you spend more time with them. And then secondarily, just being aware of if you're asking them to do work for free. That is just something that we have to think about. I'll leave it at that.
Can I add something to that, Adam, if you don't mind? So I think in terms of reaching out to people, something I realized and that kind of warmed my heart is that there's like a loose community of academics out in industry. And I found that we really have a love for each other, so that I sometimes specifically find people who have PhDs in the social science or humanities, and then I message them. And it may be to just say like, hey, I see that you have this experience. I love seeing anthros in the wild, whatever. And can I connect with you? And usually I get just such positive reception across the board from people. And I think it's because there's this shared experience of leaving this space and going somewhere else that creates this sense of community. And I have had people be so generous with their time with me. And I usually ask for a 15-minute conversation focused around a very specific topic. And it's never, hi, can you give me a job or an employee referral? Because that's a little too on the nose. But it's usually along the lines of, hey, I see you're doing this work and, I'm trying to get more equipped in, quantitative methods. Can I have 15 minutes of your time or something like that? And sure, most people don't say yes, but enough people say yes to where I've had a lot of conversations with people I've never met in real life. And it's been really great. So I also suggest finding people who have some kind of PhD related to your field or research interest and connect with them on that basis, on that commonality, and start finding that community of people who live out in industry but have an academic soul. So find us and connect to us, and it's a vast network and it's really exciting. So don't be afraid to reach out.
There was a request in the chat for a story, a specific example of how you can get a job using just connections. And so I hate to do this as the moderator, but if you'll indulge me, I can briefly tell my story of the two postdocs. I know the spirit of this webinar is meant to be about people looking for transitioning outside of academia. But my story is really the smallest possible transition of what it would have been if I had got these jobs. It would have been a transition from a PhD in linguistics to a postdoc in a school of education. Jumping fields is a smaller jump than jumping out of academia altogether, but I think is a similar kind of networking that can take place to get you there. In my case, the dissertation I was writing was about, interaction and mathematics education. And so I was doing a sort of para-ethnographic work, if you can call it that, by finding progressive math educators on Twitter and following them to see what they were talking about in the field. And it gave me some really great examples, expanded my thinking of what's possible in math education in ways that were useful for my research program at the time that I don't need to get into right now. The point is that I got to know people, and I would engage with them in these conversations on Twitter, and I would say, you know, it sounds like you're doing this and that. It feels really ethnographic. I'm trained in that. I do a lot of discourse analysis. Here's what that might add to it. And we were just having these conversations online and like sharing perspectives, sharing references and that kind of thing. And so one of these people that I was connected with is a professor in the education school at Vanderbilt. And she just tweeted one day, there are applications are open for the doctoral symposium that comes in advance of the International Conference of the Learning Sciences. And I was like, well, I've never heard of this conference, but I'm at the right stage of my career. I should check it out. I did check it out. I got funded to go to the conference. I went, it was really cool. I got to meet a lot of people who are not anthropologists, didn't go to the conferences I was going to, but I was citing a lot of their work. And while I was there, I also happened to meet someone who was the PhD advisor of another person that I met on Twitter as a contact from someone that I know through non-academic, you know, like 3 degrees of separation to these people. But we ended up hanging out, and long story short, too late. They ended up collaborating with me on an NSF grant for a postdoc, which we went through 2 rounds of the funding cycle on that. And the NSF didn't see fit to pay us for that. But if they had, then I wouldn't be where I am right now, so I have no regrets. The point being that came about entirely through Twitter. The other postdoc is the same professor at Vanderbilt said at one point, oh, I've got a grant coming in and we need someone who does discourse analysis. And I said, unfortunately, I'm not free to move to Nashville. But if I had been at a different place in my personal life and had a different family situation, that might have been an option for me. So both of these are examples of the kind of thing that can happen through social media that feed back into your professional world, but also expand your horizons in ways that can be really productive. Thanks for that. Thanks for that point of personal privilege. We've got, I guess, just a moment to wrap up. So I just wanted to ask if there are any final thoughts from our presenters, and then we can turn it back over to the original moderators.
Sure, I'll speak. So my final thoughts are, get excited. I know there's a lot of anxiety and angst and fear around the job market, especially during this time. I completely acknowledge that. And if it makes anyone feel better, I'm going to be on the job market next year. But I say get excited because my experience as an anthro out in the real world is, one, people really love anthropologists. They don't always know what we do, but people have a very positive kind of schematic image about anthropologists and social scientists really out in industry. So just know that people do like us out there. I would say tone down a little bit of the kind of behavioral attitudes that are maybe unhealthy that we learned in academia. It's not about being the smartest person or using the most obscure academic jargon and pointing out how, you know, you've read or done so much. It's really about what you can offer and what you can do. So I think there's a little bit of an identity shift that should also happen, that applying these methods in this presentation kind of helps you achieve, because it's more about the value and what you bring than your academic accolades. So don't rely on your accolades, rely on your knowledge and on the methods and the things you learned through using the methods in this presentation. And I can assure you that you're going to have just a much better quality experience on the job market if you do these things, if you work and think strategically, engage with respect and intentionality, and really have agency and invest in yourself as a professional with an identity to build. That will yield a much positive experience. And I say this as someone who did it completely wrong and really failed, and then finally wisened up and then did it right. And now I feel so much more empowered to be on the job market next year. So invest in yourself, try these methods, reach out to us on LinkedIn, and I think you're going to find a better experience. So be excited. That's my last word.
Thank you so much, Ingrid and Adam, for a wonderful presentation. Here is a summary slide of what our wonderful presenters have told us today. Be strategic about the job market by using an anthropological approach to understand different fields. Use digital platforms as part of your job market strategy to find positions, learn about field values, engage with thought leaders, increase your network, connect with prospective employers, and share a professional identity. And 3, harness digital platforms to increase confidence and success. Next slide, please. As some closing remarks, please complete your evaluation of this webinar. It will be emailed to you. You may see the postings of this webinar on the AAA website. Again, number 1, you will see the career webinar recordings there. Number 2, the PowerPoint slide decks will be available for you. Number 3, a list of all the resources our presenters have shared for you. And number 4, answers to all of your questions. Please stay on the lookout for more career-related offerings. Online workshops are coming early in December. Next slide, please. As you can see, this was Deep Hanging Out Digitally, Social Media Strategies for the Contemporary Job Market. And coming in December 2020, we have some amazing webinars lined up, Breaking into Design, a workshop, Setting up your own online business, and communicating your research to the public. So please be on the lookout for these webinars. Thank you so much.